very, very frustrated with the mission because a training mission does not have the same type of result as a go out and kill the bad guy type of mission, the operational, what we call the kinetic and kinetic activity type of thing, where you were actually going targeting. Like, it's called lethal targeting. We had more of a non-lethal targeting mission where we were trying to aid the local populace in bettering themselves. And so we had a group of infantry guys in my unit. It was an atypical unit. A support battalion has MPs, truck drivers, cooks, intel. It has an intel company, which I supported at the battalion staff. And we worked primarily not only aiding the brigade, which was a 5,000 personnel group that was over in a province, but we were training the Afghan soldiers, and they were really, when we were downrange, in Afghanistan, they were really, really upset with the type of mission that we had. And so the command had to explain to them that our mission was different and not typical of the experience that everyone else was having. And I knew, because I was in the meetings every day with the commander, I understood what our mission was, but a lot of the information in the intent of the mission was not put down to that level. And so I can see where a lot of the frustration at the private level is, because if you go over to Afghanistan and you've been trained to kill, that's what we're trained in basic training. And
that's why we got an army.
I think that's why you train an army. And then your job is radically changed to train soldiers of another country and have empathy for someone with another position in life, a lot in life as you. It's a struggle, I think, as an organization, to try to keep people, to keep your people motivated on doing the job.
So and it seems to me that you hit the nail on the head there. That to my knowledge, the military is not trained to train people to do those kinds of tasks from the ground floor up, like you're talking about. So I would be very frustrated if you put me into a role like that when, as you poignantly said, whatever that word is, the military's trained to be the military. It's shock and awe, if you will. We go in and we fight the war, and we're not trained to be policemen, so therefore we don't have any experience to rely back on to train somebody as a policeman, and so forth. So I would think there's no training in that regard for these troops in the military coming up from basic to being deployed to Afghanistan. Would that be kind of correct?
Well, yes, but a huge credit to our troops, because we are flexible and we are trained, and we were able to have efficiency while being over there. I know my unit had great large amounts of success. I know sometimes when you're trying to equate success, you don't really use, like we were talking in the last segment, the duck, duck, goose example, but you have to reference where they are and where you're trying to get them. And sometimes, my own personal opinion, wars shouldn't be 10 years, 11 years long.
Sarge, that's exactly what was on my mind.
Yeah.
Here we are talking about your most recent tour, which is just a little while ago, and we're still training up these people that are basically illiterate, and yet we've been over there for over 10 years. What the heck has been going on? Why all the bloodshed? And I know I'm getting political, but I don't really care, because our guys and gals are over there dying right now. And what is the purpose? If there's such a level of disinterest or disillusionment with our younger troops, because they're post 9/11 vets, they want to go, hold up the flag and support the country and all this, and they get on station at some forward operating base, which yours was called what? What was
FOB Rushmore, Forward Operating Base Rushmore, which was a what they call a provincial headquarters, and it was a joint base. So I lived in very close proximity, which I really didn't like sometimes, but with the Afghan nationals. And I'll tell you another poignant thing to say is, in my 8.5 to almost 9 months there, I never once met a local national that was a female. So a part of my training and I understood that, but to come back and to live in our great society here and to see people of all different types walking around and having that type of freedom, and then to go into another culture where they don't really view things like that. Or, I was at the governor's compound, and the governor's compound essentially
the governor of the province you're talking about.
Yes, governor of the province, and that compound was basically where everyone went to get any of their government services. And so for me, as an intel analyst trying to figure out the social, political, and an economic environment that we were in, to never see a female local national unless they were an interpreter, which actually the interpreters that we had that were female were not local nationals. They were Americans that came over, and they were called Cat 3 interrogators, which there's a category level. But that was really, that was huge to me, because I saw I was in the high population center, which had 90% of the population of that province, which would be a state for us, and I never once saw a female.
Wow, how interesting. And so I had a couple other questions along Garen's track, but that brings me to another track. And I'm sure we have female soldiers deployed over there, and how does that affect them, or how effective can they be in that kind of male-dominated environment?
Well, let me tell you something. The interesting thing about the cultural difference is that the men, Afghan males, are astounded by American women, and I think that's two-pronged. The number one thing is that they're astounded that they can, work with men and do the same things as men do, which I think is a testament to our culture. But also,
do they resent that when they see women actively, doing whatever you guys are doing?
Garen, they cater to them. They fall over themselves to cater to them, and it's the funniest thing you will ever see. Let me get you on another point, because this is one thing that a lot of people are not really talking about. And the Marines started this program called Female Engagement Teams, and those, what we call FETs, would be a group of women who would go out tactically with the tactical units and engage the local national females, because of the problem I was telling you before, how I never saw one. And the Army right now has taken that idea and put it out in the front. And they're putting their best female soldiers in these elite groups of women in general to engage. And I was just before I left, as I was leaving, I was still training my unit to go to Afghanistan, because that's what they're going to be there at the end of this month. And a lot of the emphasis that I was doing as an intel sergeant was training the young female soldiers how to use their skills of empathy and sympathy to get information. And that is where the battle is being fought right now. The battle really isn't being fought like hand-to-hand combat. We have to use atypical ways to figure out how to get information, because even in Homeland Security today, everything is about information, and that's where I kind of was like, bing, I know exactly what I was supposed to do in the Army and with intelligence in general, because it's what intelligence drives operations. If you've heard anybody ever say that, it's a true statement. Operations generals and majors and colonels they'll say it, but they won't do it, but it is the truth. And a part of my experience, especially in a combat environment, was the relationship between the intelligence officer and the operations officer. It was very adversarial, but it was always done in a way that was always trying to find the best way to use our resources, which mostly were soldiers, in the best way to minimize risk and to understand how we can get the job done.
And I want to hear a little bit about that hierarchy and the division of between the NCOs and their responsibilities and the officers. But getting back to the women again, because women in combat has been an issue you and I have talked about, Glenn.
Exactly.
It heated up here around the first of the year. And to hear, now Glenn, I don't know, have you seen it in the newspaper? Have you heard it on TV or otherwise on the radio, that we've got elite female soldiers and Marines out there engaging the community? I haven't ever heard that.
No, that's and it's great information to hear it, and it's good to hear it firsthand.
That's right.
And it's also good to see our military still very effective at adapting and being able to overcome any obstacles that they face.
Doesn't surprise me at all, though.
Yeah, but newspapers, heck no. I think the newspapers think the war is not there anymore. Because I don't see anything in the newspapers anymore about the war.
Yeah, unless something terrible happens or
unless it's against us.
Yeah, exactly.
Be honest.
But it brings up kind of another point, and that is that we've got this population of people, this society, this culture over there, where women are clearly second class or third class. Maybe they're with the dogs and pigs. I don't know. They're not even let out of their hovels to come out and commune with the rest of them. and yet we've got our female soldiers trying to engage them. Do you think one of the end goals is to try and bring them out of the closet, so to speak, and get them engaged in some sort of a liberty-led society? I don't know.
Well, just like in any culture, women are the neck. I like to use the phrase
well, I
from...
like to neck with my baby.
Well, I like to use the phrase from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. She says, men are the head, but women are the neck. And even in a lesser educated society, the women still know everything. That's why we're trying to get to talk to them. They know everything. They know about everyone.
They may be more inclined to release some information.
And just like...
See, folks, we're talking to an intelligence officer here, so listen up, please.
Well, it's an interesting thing because women like to talk to other women. I mean, that's just... when I was doing this training with this female engagement team...
the FET.
Yes, the FET. The FET. And, I try not to use the acronyms because they get a little confusing. And some acronyms, I don't even know what they are, but I know what it means. So, to be able... And I had some experience, training these young ladies... use their own life experiences and try to get on their level as to sometimes they just need medicine for an aching back. And that would open up the conversation to things that might not always come out if you were talking to the head Taliban guy. Maybe his wife might let it out because it's just in conversation, and like I was talking about, you never see them. They're shut-ins. They don't have a lot of personal interaction with anyone in their communities. So to have someone show empathy who looks like them is a huge plus on the intelligence side for operations going forward in Afghanistan.
And I would think the basic ability for humans, I won't even just say females, but for humans to want to interact with one another and being withheld from that for the women over there, I can see where that's a very effective program because there's somebody that the men, I guess, let talk with the women, whereas they hide them from the men. So.
Well, male soldiers in Afghanistan are culturally not supposed to talk to females. So if we as soldiers, male soldiers, talk to female local nationals, that is usually seen as a huge insult. And a part of our job down there, like it or not, is to try to understand them and to try to help them along in their journey as a society. So a part of that, and so as an adaptive unit, especially because I only have experience in the Army, when we have a problem like that, we try to show the flexibility to figure out, critical thinking, problem skills wise, how to approach it in a different way in order to get the outcome that we still want.
And folks, I want to share with you that, again, we're talking with Sergeant Eric Hoppenbrouwer, who just returned from Afghanistan, serving our country in the Army. The 715th MP Company, which is in Fort Bliss right now, right here in Melbourne, is going to be going over there engaging somewhat of the same mission, I would imagine, training up some of the locals on how to be Afghan National Army and police.
Sounds like it to me.
Yeah, but again, Sarge, the idea is you're not just watching out for the Taliban. You're training up these people that may have a bias against Americans, even though they're within our fold here. So the level of stress and anxiety, what were some of the reintegration issues that faced you? And again, we're just talking recently, but so you're probably still in the midst of it. You mentioned the culture shock of being over there where it's, basically societally desolate to over here where everything's vibrant and moving and colors and all this. Any other issues you want to bring up about reintegration and the problems our troops are having?
Well, Garen, I came back in summer of 2011, and a part of that, at least for soldiers, American soldiers, is that we don't get to drink alcohol while we're over there. And I know the airmen, while they're on their air bases like in Manus, which I liked Manus, the base in Manus more than, I don't know, some cities in America, which it only speaks to the testament of how much resources we use for our soldiers downrange. But they got to drink two beers a night, which I was kind of like angry at, But really, you come back and you'd be surprised. One of the issues that many soldiers have is you feel like you want to make up for things that you missed. And for us downrange, time stands still. one of the most poignant, one of the craziest days I had downrange was, you know, when you're at war, you're worried about, you know, your life and your limbs and your family back home, and part of being a intelligence analyst in the briefings that I had to the commander, because he was busy 24/7, was to tell him what was going on back home. You know, just to give him a brief synopsis, because our operations are 24/7. A lot of times my shift, I say that in quotations, was a 12-hour shift, but I'd say on average 7 days a week I worked about 18-hour days. You know, most of the time it got up to 20.
And this is typical.
Typical.
For our troops.
Typical. And the talk
so
environment.
Again, I just want to throw this in there. Folks, there's no parallel between a job here in the private sector and our military.
Yes.
No matter how much the press wants to tell you there's no parallel to be drawn at all.
At all. Period. And so the day, and I don't know if y'all remember, I think it was in spring of 2011, there was a tornado, huge tornado in Alabama. And there were, I guess, 191 casualties. Well, it's kind of hard to tell a commander that happened today, you know, when we're worried about casualties all the time. But at the end of it, when I came back, my unit, my brigade, we had 19 casualties. So in one day in America, 191 civilians died from a tornado, a natural disaster. And yet, you know, you're working, you're trying to make sure you're taking care of yourself every day, and you realize that sometimes you're a little bit safer in Afghanistan in a combat zone than people are in America. And that to me was so prophetic, because, you know, to this day, I was speaking to Kim last night on the phone, and I was telling her about how sometimes sounds, sights, smells, they bring back feelings that I got when I was in combat. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, let me tell you this, because a lot of soldiers have experience, and those experiences then turn into feelings, because they never really get rid of those feelings. So when an airplane going into, you know, Melbourne International goes over, and I get the feeling of my first rocket attack again. And I'm in America, I'm safe, but that feeling comes over, and about 30 seconds later, it's gone, because I know I'm not there anymore. But you know what? That's something that I experienced, and I'm pretty sure that most veterans, that's what we don't really want to talk about with other people, because it's hard to explain those feelings, because it's just a matter of, it was an experience and feelings in which, like one of the ways I was trying to, I hate to talk too long, but one of the ways I was trying to reintegrate myself into civilian life was I was a part of a flag football league in West Melbourne, and I wanted to do something competitive and something that it could be fun. And I was telling a young 20-year-old kid who was going to, you know, BCC, about this experience where in that first attack, that first rocket attack, you learn to compartmentalize your feelings, and you know the Army trains you, go to a mortar bunker and wait until the all clear is given. And some people, regardless of their training or whatever, and we have a lot of civilians over there, which the civilian side of how many people are in combat that are civilians is, I could talk a whole hour about that as well. But
another time for sure, because it's a topic that we touch on often.
But a young female civilian was in shock of what was going on. And just the feeling of stopping her and telling her, hey, you need to go to the hardened building right across the hall, put on your gear, you know, your flak vest, your helmet, put on that gear and go over there now, without scaring her even more. That feeling is amazing to me personally, even though, you know, people will say, you know, soldiers say, we're not heroes, we're just doing our job. And it's true, but sometimes people here in America have a hard time understanding how that moment impacts you as a person. You know what I'm saying? It's
Oh yeah, I can empathize fully with that. I know. I can give a quick example. When I came back from a joint tour, if you will, between Thailand and Vietnam, and the second day I was back was in the afternoon, early afternoon, and they popped the siren off to test the siren, and I jumped in the nearest ditch, and my wife is going, what in the world is going on here? But it's the same thing with your example about sights and sounds and other things that stimulate those experiences right back to you. So, and you know, you try and explain that to a non-military person, they don't have a clue.
And folks, this is something that's super cool about American Warrior Radio. We're always bringing you guests that have a new and different perspective. We've been talking with Sergeant Eric Hoppenbrouwer, who was recently deployed to Afghanistan. He's shared with you all kinds of his war stories and really a deep understanding of what our mission is over there and the insight he's acquired after being there and how we're perceived and what our end goal is. But before we go any further on that, because we really could talk forever, and the reason, because it's not getting out anywhere else.
Ever.
Okay? That's why there's such a thirst for that out there. But you got something else. Now, you just mentioned when you came back, part of your reintegration strategy was to be competitive and got in a flag football league. Cool. Awesome. We encourage everybody to do things like that. A lot of the Warriors aren't going to do that. 1 out of 5, am I right, Glenn, have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's been confirmed.
Some people will try and tell you it's a higher percent.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea is you got engaged in the community. You kind of jumped right in. And what's another area that you jumped right into? Well, being the political animal that you are.
Well, Garen, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I really do love this country, and a part of being a good citizen is being active politically, and not a sense of doing, trying to get that commissioner job so that you can get the kickbacks. It's kind of preserving the freedoms in which we all were able to use, I guess.
And that's what you're over in Afghanistan essentially,
sure. But
defending.
I got that feeling more being in Afghanistan. So a part of what I did is join a local group called the Brevard Tea Party, and that is a group that centers specifically around taxation issues and economic issues, and really they're getting focused, because I know a lot of people back in 2004, I believe, got really hyped on the Tea Party movement. This is still the same idea. I'd like to say it probably needs to be a different brand, meaning we're specifically talking about your economic freedoms and just your pocketbook issues. I had to, let's put those two things together. As an Army sergeant, had to counsel my soldier because he didn't understand why his paycheck went down on January 1st.
Sure.
So since I'm clued in, I told him, well, there's a 2% increase in payroll tax, and even us as soldiers get payroll tax.
Exactly.
So
we've only got a couple minutes left, so you've joined the Brevard Tea Party, and you guys have a phenomenal event coming up, which AVET Project is going to benefit from, so we want to salute you and support you, and it's a great opportunity for folks in the community to get to know Brevard Tea Party a little bit better, and also tell us about the event.
Well, the event is going to be similar to a paid EDC or chamber event. It's called Taste of Freedom.
Taste of Freedom.
We'll have
Where are you holding it?
We're holding it at the King Center, actually.
Beautiful venue.
Yes, beautiful. And there's going to be about 20 to 25 restaurants, and they're going to sample their fare for us. And we're
running out of time. Give the web address real quick.
Okay, web address is tasteoffreedom.com, and there's hyphens in between each word. Taste-of-freedom.com. Check it out, please.
And that's the Brevard Tea Party. We've been talking with Sergeant Eric Hoppenbrouwer. We hope to have him back, especially as the event draws near, because this is a very valuable guest to all you listeners out there. And we appreciate you being here on American Warrior Radio today. And as always, Glenn,
don't forget, think of that.
So we're out.